In the early hours of the morning, a group of men walked through the thick forest. They had only planned for a simple walk, but what they found was far from normal. Up ahead between the trees, they spotted two deer in a small river, or at least what was left of them. At first, it seemed like both were just lying there side by side, but as the men got closer, the truth became clear. One deer was already dead, and next to the dead deer, its rival was still alive, though barely hanging on. Its antlers were tightly locked with the dead deer's, and it struggled desperately to free itself. Though it seems exhausted, but the harder it fought, the more trapped it became. The men who had been enjoying the quiet of the forest just moments ago now found themselves in the middle of a life or death struggle, and time was running out. The surviving deer, a buck with smooth brown fur, was getting more desperate by the second. If they didn't act fast, it might collapse from exhaustion, just like the other deer. One of the men stepped forward with concern on his face. "We have to help it," he said, his voice calm but urgent. The others nodded, but no one moved right away. They knew the risks. A frightened animal could be dangerous, especially one with sharp antlers. The men quickly gathered, talking quietly about how to handle the situation. One of them had a small saw, and they hoped it could cut through the tangled antlers without hurting the living deer. But it wouldn't be easy. They had to get very close to the struggling deer, and there was no guarantee it would stay calm. After a short while, they made their choice. Slowly and carefully, the men started moving toward the trapped deer. They moved together, their eyes locked on the buck, whose energy was fading fast. It let out a distressed sound, using all of its remaining strength to pull against the weight of the dead deer. But no matter how much it struggled, it couldn't get free. As the men got closer, they realized how serious the situation was. The antlers of the dead deer were tangled tightly around the living ones, and any sudden movement could make the knot worse. One wrong move, and they could make things more difficult. One of the men held the saw firmly. He knew they had to be fast but gentle. Taking a deep breath, he knelt down and carefully moved closer to the antlers. The living deer looked at him, and for a moment, it seemed like it might run, but its exhaustion kept it still. Maybe deep down, it knew these men were its only chance for survival. The man with the saw carefully placed the saw near the tangled antlers, trying not to scare the deer. Time seemed to slow as he started sawing. The other men stood close by, ready to help, but also ready to jump back if the deer made a sudden move. They worked in silence for what felt like forever, the only noises being the steady sawing and the occasional snort from the deer. They knew they were racing against time, and if they didn't free it soon, it might not survive. Finally, the saw cut through the last tangle, and with a final scrape, the dead deer's antlers dropped away, and the living buck, now free, stumbled backward. The men stepped back, giving the deer space. They silently watched as the buck regained its balance, and for a moment, it stood still, staring at them with a mix of exhaustion and caution. Then, after one last look at the dead deer, it turned and dashed into the trees, disappearing into the forest. The men stood quietly, watching the spot where the deer had vanished. They felt a mix of pride and sadness. They had saved the buck, but the sight of the dead deer reminded them of how harsh nature could be. As the deer ran into the forest, the men let out deep breaths, their hearts still racing from the intense rescue. But the men knew they weren't safe yet. Even though they had freed the deer, danger still surrounded them. The forest, usually peaceful and calm, now felt threatening. It wasn't just the wild animals or the rough terrain. There was something more. They felt the weight of what had happened. They had seen many tough situations at work, but watching one buck die while the others struggled to survive was something they wouldn't forget. The surviving buck, just over 3 years old, had fought hard but was clearly tired. Even after being freed, it might not make it through the night. 3 years old, one of the men said quietly as they walked back to the truck. That deer was just starting to reach his peak. Whitetail bucks are strongest at that age, building muscles and growing bigger antlers. Yet this one almost faced an early death. "Yeah," the other replied, feeling the same sadness. "A flight like that could have killed him. They get so focused on fighting that they don't see the danger until it's too late." It wasn't uncommon for whitetail bucks to challenge each other, especially during the rut, which is the peak of mating season. Male deer fight over territory, dominance, and access to females. Nature wants the strongest to pass on their genes. Most fights end quickly, with one deer backing down, but sometimes their antlers get locked together and they can't separate. It's a rare but tragic outcome of their fierce competition. "That was one of those rare times," the other guy said, remembering the sight of the tangled antlers. "I didn't think it could happen like that in real life." The other man nodded sadly. "You hear about it, but seeing it is difficult. It's a cruel twist of nature. These fights are supposed to be quick, just a test of strength. But when things go wrong," his voice trailed off, and they both understood. Nature can be harsh, even to its strongest creatures. After reaching the truck, the two men packed their gear in silence. Their minds were still on the surviving buck. The deer had faced many challenges, and even though they had saved it from one danger, it was still in a risky situation. It was weak, dehydrated, and confused. "Do you think he'll make it?" one man asked, sensing what the other was thinking. "I don't know," he replied quietly. "He has a chance now, which is more than he had before, but it's still up to him, and he has to fight to survive." The drive back was filled with silence. Both men were deep in thought about what had just happened. It was hard not to feel connected to the animals they tried to protect, even though they knew they couldn't save them all. Nature has its own rules, and they understood that better than most, but at least they had given the young buck a chance to fight, and sometimes that's all they could do. What are your thoughts on this story? Have you ever seen a young deer with its antlers stuck together? Did you try to help them? And what would you do in that situation? Share your thoughts in the comments. And also, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more amazing animal stories. And we'll see you in the next video.